Hello, I'm Rabbi Elton from the Great Synagogue in Sydney, and our personality today is Maimonides, the Rambam, born in 1135 and died in 1204. The Rambam, Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, was born in Cordoba in Spain at a relatively peaceful time for the Jewish people in that part of the world. He was trained by his father and began his career in Jewish learning. There was a great disruption as a more anti-Jewish Islamic faction drove into the area where the Rambam lived, and he was forced to flee. And this began a lifetime of journeying from one place to another, from Morocco to the land of Israel to Egypt eventually, where he was the Nagid of the Jewish community, the leader, and where he passed away, although he was buried and is buried in Tiberias. The Rambam had an extraordinary career. His first major work was a commentary to the Mishnah, the foundational work of the oral law and its record, the work around which the whole Talmud is based. He wrote that apparently at the age of 18, although that may be a legendary account. Then he began his most important work, in terms of the legal tradition at any rate, which is the Mishneh Torah, which is a total restatement of the entirety of Jewish law derived from the Talmud. Whereas his other books were written in Arabic, this was written in Hebrew and is still one of the most important sources of Jewish law today. A few weeks ago we discussed Rav Yitzchak Alfasi, the Rif. He is alongside the Rif as one of the most important sources of contemporary Jewish law. He also authored the most important philosophical work in the Jewish tradition of the medieval period, Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed. The Rambam also left some very interesting personal accounts. For example, he had a younger brother called David, who was in business and who supported the family, including supporting the Rambam's own intellectual work. He died on a business trip, he drowned, and this cast the Rambam into a very deep depression, which lasted several years, which he writes about very movingly in his private correspondence. He also discusses what his week and his weekends were like. He talks about working very hard as the physician in the Sultan's palace, how he has to work both at home on his intellectual pursuits and go all the way to the palace, serve there all day, and then comes home exhausted. And he finds a long line of people from the Jewish community waiting for him, asking him to sort out their problems or answer their questions. For rabbis, he leaves a fascinating account of the way his Shabbat would work. He attended synagogue quite early in the morning, and then he would teach the people, and then they would go home and have their lunch. And then he said he would come back and teach again in the afternoon of Shabbat, and he said some people would come back and listen to him. It's a great comfort to contemporary rabbis that even in the case of the Rambam himself, only some people from the community came back to listen to his talks on a Shabbat afternoon. His major Jewish works were completed towards the beginning of his life. In fact, the later part of his life was mostly spent on writing medical works, which were also a very important part of his output during his lifetime. He's known as the Nesher Hagadol, the Great Eagle, and in terms of a Jewish intellect, probably the greatest we've ever had amongst our people, who could cover the areas of commentary and legal discourse and philosophy, and no survey of Jewish history and Jewish intellectual history is ever complete without a detailed engagement with and understanding of the Rambam of Maimonides. Thanks for joining.